To be able to welcome our Indonesian friends, I hope that this will continue to be something that we are able to celebrate and acknowledge the relationship between our countries, the relationship between Cowra and the special bond that I think we have as members of the Cowra community with the Indonesian community. And I look forward to having conversation a little later this morning with both the embassy and the consulate around what that might look like. But today is an opportunity to reflect on history, to reflect on how fortunate we are, and reflect on the sacrifice and the lives that were lost in one form or another, particularly those who came as civilian internees, probably better described these days as political prisoners, eventually released, but not without sacrifice and tragedy. So thank you for being here, and I'm delighted to be able to extend again a very warm welcome on a cold day to you all. Thank you.
Our founding father once said, "A great nation is a nation who always remember the service of its heroes." Today, along with our Australian friends, we gather here to remember those who have served to proclaim and defend Indonesian independence. The Indonesian Hero Day, commemorated every 10th of November, is not only a mere ceremony. It is time to reflect on the sacrifice made by our founding fathers to proclaim Indonesia's independence. It is a moment to evaluate what we have been doing so far to continue their spirit in building our nation and our country. And as written on the memorial in front of you, here lies the remains of Indonesian freedom fighters and their offspring, victims of exile from Bovendigul, who fought for Indonesia's independence. Not all Indonesians here in Australia knows about this history. That is why we need to spread this information, particularly to our young generation here in Australia, to raise their awareness so that they can learn about their history. The existence of Indonesian graves here in Cowra explains a small part of the great relation between Indonesia and Australia. Indonesia will never forget the great support of the Australian people during our struggle for independence. Let me conclude by saying that in order to become a hero nowadays, you don't need to be involved in a war or take arms against your adversaries. We just need to show empathy, help, and respect each other, particularly during this difficult time. We have to use the spirit of the Heroes Day to recharge our energy, to recover together, and to recover stronger. Thank you.
The participants may place the flower to the grave right in front of you.
whilst we stand here in front of these 13 Indonesian graves on a cold November day when it's normally warm and sunny, it is a very good reminder of the fact that there was Indonesians who arrived in Cowra as civilian internees during the Second World War to be part of the prisoner of war camp, sadly. And of course, they arrived in that cold weather, which meant that some of them succumbed to the illnesses and pneumonia that they were able to catch at that time, and obviously paid the sacrifice of giving their lives. They were obviously released shortly before the war was finished, and we will remember them, I think, as freedom fighters and as civilian internees, not military personnel. And it's important that we in Cowra and the Indonesian community and the Australian community continue to appreciate and understand the importance of these three graves, this site within the Cowra General Cemetery. Something that Cowra Council and the Cowra community will always look after and maintain as a mark of respect for those who came to Cowra and never got to go back to their homelands. These sorts of memorials are very important for future generations so that we understand the culture, the history, the heritage of all our nations, and that these sorts of sacrifices and these tragedies and sadnesses don't ever get lost in just the mundane life that we can sometimes live.
Hari ini, hari Sabtu tanggal 13 November tahun 2021, dalam rangka perayaan Hari Pahlawan 10 November 2021, kita, Konsulat Jenderal Republik Indonesia di Sydney, bersama dengan para pejabat Kedutaan Besar Republik Indonesia di Canberra, beserta seluruh masyarakat Indonesia, wakil-wakil masyarakat Indonesia, berkumpul di Cowra Shire, di New South Wales ini, di pemakaman, untuk kita upacara memperingati Hari Pahlawan. Dan di sini terdapat 13 makam warga negara Indonesia yang pada saat tahun 1945 dibawa oleh dari Bovendigul, tahanan Belanda, dibawa dan dititipkan sekutu di Australia. Kita datang bersama-sama di sini selain untuk memperingati Hari Pahlawan, untuk memberikan respek penghargaan kita kepada pahlawan yang telah mendahului kita. Dan tentu juga saya sangat bergembira walaupun cuaca hujan, dingin, tapi suasana tetap meriah. Pemerintah Cowra Shire juga sangat-sangat mendukung. Telah hadir pula Mayor Bill dari Cowra Shire dan juga Deputi Mayornya Judy. Sangat-sangat membahagiakan kita, membanggakan juga. Ini sebagai pesan juga untuk para generasi muda bahwa kita tidak boleh lupa dengan sejarah. Kita tidak boleh lupa juga dengan para pahlawan yang telah mendahului kita. Kita hidup, kita bisa menjadi seperti ini juga bagian dari perjuangan para pahlawan yang telah mendahului kita. Jadi pesan saya, terutama pada generasi muda, tetaplah ingat sejarah. Tetaplah ingat jasa para pahlawan. Tanpa darah mereka, tanpa kerja keras mereka, tanpa perjuangan mereka, kita tidak bisa seperti sekarang ini. Tetap semangat untuk Indonesia. Terima kasih.
And in amongst these prisoners were Indonesian families. And it must have been hard for the people of Cowra to understand why families were being held in a prisoner of war camp. And that's why, after a relatively short time, they were released and went back into the community. The Indonesians were little known in Cowra at the time, but they became quite well known because of the fact that the Australian government said that it was illegal to keep Indonesians or people of other nationalities who were civilian internees in a prisoner of war camp. We didn't have prisoners of war from Indonesia here. We had families who were exiled.
Moving a bit forward, 1 year later in 1943, another group of 500 Indonesians arrived in Cowra. On a cold winter morning, men, women and children. Many were sick, shivering in their thin sarongs because they had just come from Merauke in Papua New Guinea.
Hello, I'm Lawrence Ryan and I'm associated with the Cowra Breakout Association, and I've been bringing people on tours of this area for almost 30 years now. Now, Cowra is well known as the home of the Japanese prisoner of war breakout, and that's why this camp is most famous. But there are other stories to be told. There was always more Italians at the prisoner of war camp than there were Japanese. And for a period in 1942 and 43, there were many Indonesians here. They came in two lots. First were Indonesian merchant seamen who all they wanted to be was to be paid a fair wage for the work they were doing during the war effort. The Dutch government said, no, you aren't paying, you're on strike, and they requested that the Australian government hold them in a prisoner of war camp, and they ended up here in Cowra. They were later released, but we had a second group of Indonesians come, and this is a particularly tragic story. It's families, whole groups of families, parents, children, elderly people who came to Cowra because they were Indonesians who wanted a free Indonesia, free of the colonial rule of the Dutch at the time. And those people, the Dutch government was afraid that with Japan invading Indonesia, that they would be installed in a government under the control of Japan. And as a result, they were also held here at the prisoner of war camp in Cowra, something that's quite unusual. And it was unusual for Australia too. And it was against the Australian Constitution. And those people were subsequently released. Some went to Melbourne, some went to Mackay in North Queensland. But at the end of World War II, they all returned home. And that home wasn't back to exile in Papua in New Guinea. It was back to Indonesia, where many of them became involved in the Free Indonesia movement that led to Indonesian independence finally back in 1949. So whenever you come to Cowra, don't just think of the Cowra prisoner of war breakout. When you look at the prisoner of war camp here at Cowra and you see the wonderfully interpreted peace precinct that we have here now, just remember, it wasn't only the home of Japanese prisoners of war, it was the home of Italian prisoners of war, many who didn't want to fight, and it was the home of Indonesian internees who weren't even combatants, who were held at a prisoner of war camp.
This, of course, is the Australian World Peace Bell, normally in capital cities, but fortunately here in Cowra because of the Cowra connection with world peace and reconciliation. This is a full replica of the peace bell that is in the United Nations, the first peace bell, which is in the forecourt of the United Nations in New York.
Jadi terima kasih lagi juga saya ucapkan, thank you very much for coming. Tadi Mayor Bill sudah sampaikan ini adalah World Peace Bell, ini replika dari aslinya di New York. Hampir semua negara punya World Peace Bell ini. Kita semua punya keinginan yang sama tentang perdamaian, tentang peace. Jadi ini juga sangat penting untuk kita semua, untuk anak-anak muda kita, untuk menghargai sejarah. Kita di seluruh negara, di seluruh manapun juga kita memiliki satu kesamaan yang sama, yaitu menginginkan perdamaian, menginginkan peace. Jadi saya kira ini jadi suatu hal yang bagus untuk juga kita sampaikan lebih lanjut ke teman-teman, adik, saudara, dan anak-anak kita. Sekali lagi terima kasih, selamat mukul bel.
Austin, member of the Cowra Breakout Association. We're here in front of the Australian chapter of the World Peace Bell, which was awarded to the town of Cowra for the reconciliation process following the Cowra Breakout. Whilst the Japanese story is central to the story of the Cowra Breakout, we also take the time to remember those others that were here as well, Italians, Formosians, Koreans and Indonesians. When you come to Cowra, we hope you ring the peace bell.
Hi, my name is Matthew. I'm the current president of the Australia-Indonesia Youth Association, New South Wales chapter. We're just here finishing up on our trip to Cowra alongside the Consul General, the Embassy of Indonesia, and also various other Indonesian organisations based in New South Wales. And for me personally, it's been a real eye-opener and a very enriching experience. I was born in Australia and I was educated in Australia. I've previously learned about the Cowra Breakout, but I never knew that there were Indonesians, political prisoners and families interned here in this small country town in the central west of New South Wales. It's such an interesting place to see important Indonesian culture here in such a small, nice and quaint country town of New South Wales. I would encourage not only everyone, but especially the youth to come along to visit these historic sites in Cowra, not to just only see the tourist side of things like the Japanese garden, for example, which we just went past by, but also to reflect on a small microcosm of Indonesian history that occurred here during World War II. It's very important for the youth of both countries to recognize the sacrifices that were made, especially during wartime. I guess it's also a reflection of how not only the sacrifices that people have made, but also the importance of peace and the importance of dialogue between the two nations. And I feel that coming to Cowra, especially for the youth, I think that's very, very important in order to strengthen the connections between both countries. Thank you.
Halo, saya Jackson. Saya tinggal di North Sydney. Baru pertama kali datang ke Cowra ini. Ini tempat yang sebenarnya nggak sengaja datang karena diaspora ajak saya kemari, dan saya menemukan satu sejarah Indonesia yang belum pernah saya baca sebelumnya. Di sini ternyata ada orang-orang Indonesia yang dalam tanda kutip diasingkan ya, sebelum merdeka, dan kita tahu Indonesia itu bangsa yang besar, bangsa yang kuat, bangsa yang maju. Kita punya begitu luas pengetahuan kita tentang lingkungan dan sejarah, tapi kita sebenarnya saya miss sejarah yang ini, dan ini sebenarnya sejarah yang cukup penting. Sebelum kemerdekaan, tepatnya 1942, orang-orang Indonesia diasingkan kemari dan pulang ke Indonesia, dan gimana cerita seru selanjutnya Anda bisa cari tahu sendiri di Cowra ini. New South Wales, silahkan.
Dan semoga kesempatan berikutnya kita akan bisa berkunjung kembali ke sini, maybe with our family, our friends, our groups.
Sampai saya tadi terharu banget walaupun hujan, mau bersusah payah untuk mengenang pahlawan kita, untuk saling mengenal satu dengan yang lainnya.
Menurut saya sudah belasan tahun di Sydney ya, tapi terus terang nggak pernah tahu ada makam pahlawan di sini. Dan selain itu ya, dengan acara seperti ini kita itu bisa mendidik anak cucu kita nanti. Jadi bukan hanya sampai di kita tahu, tetapi kita bisa, saya bawa anak saya biar anak saya juga tahu, dan kita teruskan terus. Ya, jadi terima kasih banget, dan juga terima kasih kepada Lawrence juga.
Pertama-tama kami ucapkan terima kasih atas kerjasama semua pihak. Kiranya kesempatan ini tidak terjadi. Terlebih lagi terima kasih Lawrence, thank you very much for having us today. It is really blessed for us, and it is really just like mentioned by our colleague here, our friends here. It's very important event,
And it's all very beneficial for all of us, especially for the young people of Indonesia to know their history here in Australia. And ya, terima kasih teman-teman sekali lagi. Mudah-mudahan ini seperti sampaikan tadi bukan acara yang pertama, tapi acara juga bukan sekedar kumpul atau apa, tapi ada sesuatu yang bisa kita dapat. Dan saya kira ini suatu hal yang sangat positif, bisa kita arrange lain waktu. Sekali lagi terima kasih, sampai jumpa lagi. Mudah-mudahan dalam perjalanan kita selalu diberikan keselamatan, selalu juga diberikan kesehatan. Supaya juga untuk menutup hari kita dengan lebih berkah lagi, marilah kita berdoa bersama-sama. Berdoa berdasarkan agama dan kepercayaan masing-masing. Berdoa dimulai.
Oke, terima kasih lagi semuanya. Saya senang sekali, Lawrence. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure, and have a safe trip home, everyone.
Thank you.
And we all hope to see you in Cowra again soon.
Yeah, of course, definitely. Thank you. Pak Frans, terima kasih.
Terima kasih Pak. Semua teman-teman terima kasih. Ya.